Welcome, Dr. Symeon Rodgers, to the Resolutionary Leaders podcast, and you are for sure a real resolutionary leader. Dr. Symeon's more sedate side has expressed itself over the years as a university professor, a married priest of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and a best-selling author on the personal transformation methods used by ancient cultures. On the more edgy side, he's a martial arts expert, a certified emergency management expert, and he's trained in counterterrorism by veterans of the US and Israeli Special Forces. Dr. Symeon has written and spoken extensively on leadership, self-leadership, and organizational culture, developing a unique approach for helping today's companies and their leaders unleash their vast potential. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here. I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Helena. It's an honor to be here. Really happy to be here.
So let's just dive right in.
Sure.
What changes do you see in the modern workplace that have made the old standard leadership styles less and less effective?
I think there have been a number of things that have happened, and we're always slow to address change. We typically, as human beings, we don't address change till we hit a wall.
True.
It's pretty much that's the way it is. And although individual organizations occasionally realize they've hit a wall and have to change course, it's amazing how long people can struggle with what actually doesn't work very well. And we're at a place where, as people tell you, we've gone from the industrial age into the information age. And the information age really is the era of the knowledge worker. So if you think about it, it used to be, if you looked at industrialization at the beginning of the 1900s, if you were hiring people to come in to work in your factory, you were probably hiring from off the farm. They were coming in, they had absolutely no clue about the processes. You knew your processes. So the expertise did reside at the top. So there was typically a very pyramid type of command and control structure, which I call the hierarchical command and control model. And it made sense at the time, in a sense, because you've got the farther up you went in the chain, the more you knew, the more expertise you had. But now it's almost flipped. So the pyramid is almost inverted. You're constantly hiring people because they know a whole lot more than you do. You're not hiring people to tighten a widget. You're hiring people so they can come in and contribute their expertise and tell you how things really should be. And we haven't really made that adjustment because we still have a lot of corporate cultures, this idea that, oh, gee, I'm at a more and more senior level, therefore I know more and more. My judgment's better and better than the people I'm hiring. No, it's probably a lot worse. Because they may spend about the particular issue you're asking them to formulate a plan forward on, or whatever it is. They have thought about it for maybe dozens or hundreds of hours in relation to your organization, and you've spent maybe 30 minutes. So whose judgment's going to be better? But we have to, it really does take, in a sense, a much more humble approach on the part of leaders to understand that today's landscape is very different, even for you and I as business owners. And I'm sure you may have found this too, if you've ever outsourced to anyone or hired anybody for anything, that you're doing it because they know something you don't, or they do something better than you can. And usually you want to listen to what they say, more or less, depending. Obviously, there's your own judgment, but still. And so that's one of the major things, is that huge change in the landscape.
So are you saying that leadership now is more situational than absolute?
Oh, I think that's really the case. It's absolutely the case. And if you go back to, well, World War II is a really interesting leadership study case, and we can talk more about that in a minute. But if you think about it, here you were in, say, okay, Pearl Harbor happens. Let's put it in the American context. Pearl Harbor happens. Suddenly you're in the middle of a war on two fronts, and you have to actually rapidly build up your armed forces. So you're pulling in literally hundreds of thousands of draftees who don't know anything. They're full of enthusiasm. They're full of the proverbial piss and vinegar, but not much else. And what do? Okay, you need a firm hand. You need to be able to, because you're the people in the military already, you know the lay of the land. You have to train these people. And it's very regimented. It's very do this because I'm telling you. It's no, I don't care what your judgment is to a certain point.
Yeah.
Once they go out and they're actually in combat for a while, then they actually have judgment. And that's when you defer to the people on the front lines to know their situation. But before that, no, you don't. course, it would make no sense to do that. So that's a kind of situation where, and that's very much akin to the situation in industrialization initially, right? That we already mentioned. If you're bringing people in from the farm to tighten that widget, you got to show them how, and you know how to do it, and they don't.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. So I remember when we spoke earlier, we spoke about like the fascinating historical origin of effective leadership, the more effective leadership style. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and this is really a case of extraordinary leadership that more and more is slowly, very slowly, beginning to permeate corporate culture. And it comes also from the Second World War, but it's a counterpoint to what we just talked about, very much a counterpoint because, okay, if you go back to the North African Desert Campaign, so you have the British Eighth Army facing off against the Germans, facing off against General Rommel's Africa Corps, the famous Africa Corps. And it's a unique situation because, of course, if you think about it from the time that from your, I'm going to do a map here from your perspective, when the Germans land in Tunisia and the British are over here in Egypt, from the time the Germans land till the time they get theoretically all the way to the Nile River, they never quite got that far, but that whole way, several thousand kilometers, is through Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, into Egypt. All of that's nothing but desert, right? So from the
Yes.
Mediterranean coast, several hundred kilometers or miles to the south, it's totally desolate. It's absolute,
Wow.
there's nothing there.
That must have been a real shock to the Germans.
It was a shock to everybody.
My God.
It was just a really weird place to be. But there were two British officers who, independently of each other, realized that this presented a huge opportunity to disrupt the German supply line. So this was the formation of the origin of what we now know still today as the British SAS, the Special Air Service, one of the world's top special forces units. This is where it started, along with another unit called the Long Range Desert Group. And so there are two commanders, David Sterling of the SAS and Ralph Bagnold for the Long Range Desert Group. They went to their commanders and said, look, we have an amazing opportunity here, but you have to give us a free hand to do it. And that ran totally counter, as you can imagine, to British Army culture and that kind of discipline and control. And with nothing to lose and their backs against the wall, they agreed. And that's what it often takes, back against the wall. And so both of these guys were thinking, okay, so what do I need to make this work? Obviously, I need the best in the world. I need world-class people in this small team I'm going to build to do this. And I need certain types of expertise. I need people who are desert navigators, the best desert navigators in the world, who know the Sahara inside out. Because if we don't have that, we're going to get stuck in the middle of nowhere and we're going to die of thirst. Literally, it's life and death, right? You run out of gas, you run out of water, you're toast, right? Plus, we need the best explosive experts. We need best communications experts because communications is pretty tricky. And we need all that. So they went looking, both of them went looking for the best in the world. And where did they find them? They
Canada?
found them in. Sorry?
Because you're Canadian. I said Canada only because you're Canadian.
No, they found them in the brig. They found them in jail.
Oh.
They were in British Army.
Oh, yeah.
They were in British Army jail because think about who these people were. They're the best in the world. So they know what they can do. They know how capable they are. And they have a very low BS threshold. Let's call it that.
Right. I love
Super
it.
low. So they're always getting in trouble because they're always saying to their commanders, you're full of it. You don't know what you're talking about. And first of all, Sterling and Bagnall have to get these guys out of jail. And then they can form their units.
Awesome, let's go. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they can form their units and actually go. But then they also realized what they needed was not just expertise, but they needed an amazing amount of trust. Because if you're with a dozen guys at most, zipping through the desert hundreds of kilometers south of anybody, and you're depending on them basically because they are going to get you back alive. They're the only thing that stands between you and certain death, either from the desert or the Germans, but the desert's slightly more dangerous maybe at that point. So there's this huge factor of trust. And part of the way that they realized that they had to build trust was they had to say to everybody, look, we're a team. We get through this together, or we're going to live together or die together. As far as all this rank and saluting stuff goes, screw it all. Let's rip off the rank badges, throw them in the garbage because they're not going to help. And we're going to plan everything together because you guys have huge expertise. It's not as if I, the commander, know more about communications than you do because I hired you because, or you about explosives because when I don't, whatever it is, right? And this, so it turned that pyramid on its head, right? It's saying, okay, you guys are the experts. What do we do?
Yeah.
And this has continued even till modern times. In fact, just recently, I heard an American Special Forces guy in an interview talking about an incident in, oh, was it Iraq or Afghanistan? I think it was Iraq. They were planning some information, intelligence had come through about a high value target, and they were under pressure to go get this guy. And they were working with the SAS. And so the Americans and the SAS together were going to do this. But the SAS officer said to his guys, who were not officers, they were non-coms, maybe privates, I don't know. He said, look, you guys go into that next room, take 10 minutes, evaluate everything we know about this operation and tell us if it's going to work. And they came back and gave a absolutely killer briefing on why this was a really stupid idea and would get them all killed. And the American who saw this was just so impressed by it. But this is special forces around the world. A lot of them follow this type of model where they defer to the people under them at a certain point because they realize these people are the experts. These people have the skills. That's why we hold them in. Mm-hmm. So it really becomes that kind of thing. And some corporate cultures have taken this on board, but it's of course difficult to do because it runs totally counter to everything you have been taught, and it runs totally counter to not just that hierarchical command and control model, but I think for our instinctive human need to control things, because it's basically saying, okay, I'm willing to tolerate a bit of chaos here.
So what I heard about what you just said and how it applies today, I'm thinking about how you apply that to building trust on a team. And let's say you do have that working. Let's say you are leading in this way without the big hierarchical structure. You're allowing people to make decisions. What we need, what that group had, was the low BS tolerance. So you've got a team of people. I was thinking, how do they get that trust? Because there's no festering of little issues. Everything is just boom, boom. They're tough and they're calling it and they're moving through it. And they're not putting up with silly BS and they're not putting up with big BS. And I think that's a little bit of what's difficult and challenging in the workforce today, is that it's difficult to work out what is the BS you need to deal with and what is the BS you don't need to deal with. And then there's a lot of BS that leaders are afraid to deal with because they don't want to say the wrong thing or insult the wrong person, because there's a whole lot of perspectives that are new in the workforce, maybe not new, but are wanted in the workforce now. And so it's difficult to manage, to get the BS out of the team, to maintain the trust.
It really is, and it works at a number of levels, right? Because you got to have, on the team itself, you have to have people who like and trust each other. So that's challenge number one. If you can get past that, then you got to deal with the fact that, okay, will what we say, will it be taken on board or will it be dismissed? Mm-hmm. Will it be watered down as it goes up the chain? Will it be shoved to the side? Is it politically inconvenient? Is it politically not what people want to hear? And often it is. Often, if anything that's going to make a difference is probably going to be contrary. And contrary doesn't go well often in corporate cultures.
And contrary to something that somebody in a leadership position has signed off on.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. People don't like to be told that they're wrong. And but again, it's part of it is that, what do you want? Do you want results or do you want to protect your ego? And that's the thing everybody has to ask themselves, right? Do you want, because ultimately when you get results, you look better anyway. Yeah.
So what would be some advice, some suggestions you would give to someone that's being promoted, a newly promoted leader, or just into a leadership position?
There's a Greek proverb, amatio successora, meaning You need four eyes. It's like saying you need eyes in the back of your head,
Uh,
right? And it means just be aware of your situation, because a lot of it is situationally based. So a lot of what I see is people going into these types of positions, and they run into a whole bunch of things they've dimly thought about or never had to deal with before. Part of it is that huge amount of politics, of course,
mm,
where at a certain point everything becomes politicized. And the other thing too is often overwhelm. A lot of people who are put in these positions are simply, they're suddenly overwhelmed with the sheer volume of what they have to do. And part of it's because they're dealing with a lot of broken processes in the workplace. A lot of workplaces have absolutely terrible processes,
I
which have
agree.
slowly evolved over time. And
Mhm.
it's a bit like a Lego set that people have added one piece to every year, and you forget what the original was supposed to look like. And part of it is lack of administrative support,
Mhm.
because often they're expected to be their own admin person. And here's the bigger issue. I think for a lot of organizations, they say they want leaders, and they tell these people, guess what? You're now in a leadership position, quote unquote. Let's put that in air quotes because it really is. But they're not looking for leaders, they're looking for managers.
Mm.
Basically, they're looking for managers. So what they're looking for is not someone, because if you look at the definition of a leader, is someone who takes you from point A to point B. A manager is someone who basically keeps existing processes running.
Yeah. Mhm.
And sometimes those existing processes, as comfortable as they may be, are not really a help. But there's a huge difference between being a manager and a leader. And sometimes people are so busy managing that they don't even have time to be a leader.
100%. And also because a lot of the time they're promoted because they're very good technically at what the job
Yeah.
is. And so the ability to pull themselves out of that, they have to be given the space to get out of the weeds to be in that leadership role and
Yeah. And
the
so that
support.
leads to a couple of issues, right? One of them is because of their default setting is to default, like all human beings, we tend to default to what we know. And if
Mm.
they know
Hmm.
what's in the weeds, they'll
Hmm.
dive down, and suddenly you've got a micromanaging situation going on, which is very uncomfortable for everybody and ineffective, inefficient, and just alienates people. And then the other thing is you've you're promoting people who are good technically, as you said, but I've heard people tell me, look, there are some people who should never ever be given authority over another human being, no matter
I
how
agree.
smart they are, because that's not what they're good at.
I've experienced that. I had a leader just like that, just completely. There's a certain amount of empathy that's involved
Yeah.
in leading. And if you're not capable of that, then it's very challenging.
Oh, definitely, it would be. There's a maybe they should go and get a personality analysis through whether it's DISC or some other system like that, and realize it enables people to have a good look at, okay, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Because there are people who have very little empathy or very little emotional range,
Mm.
and that can be
Yes,
very difficult.
yes. Interesting you
So
say that. And sometimes when you say they don't have a big range, they just, sometimes they don't have a lot in the middle. They have really nice and great and then really punitive when things aren't going well. There's just not a lot of, the scale's not there.
yeah, no, absolutely, that's the case. And I've met people like this. I've been trained. I'm a trainer in the DISC personality system. DISC is one of the best systems there is and the most flexible. And it's absolutely amazing. Even the guy who trained me in it was what we call a high D personality, so very dominant personality. So he said, look, telling me that something is nice means nothing to me. Telling me something is good, that means something. So
Mm,
there's very little emotional range there. And but he was aware of it. So he was
yeah,
aware of his
yeah,
own limitations. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't aware of those limitations. And you put someone who should never be in charge of anybody. How do you know they shouldn't be in charge of anybody
right.
ever? You don't really until you, unfortunately, sometimes until you put them there. Because I've seen it once or twice where someone ends up in a leadership position where you thought they would work out and they were a total disaster
Yeah,
from the point of view of dealing with people.
yeah. And the sooner you can identify that as a leader, the better it is for everybody involved. It's making me think of when you promote someone or have someone take over a team, the value in doing like a disc profile for the whole team for everybody. And
Yep.
also having, let's say, someone like myself, a third party neutral come in and do an assessment of where the team is at. So you give the leader the four eyes. Here are your four eyes. Like I've looked 360 and this is what you're
Yep.
walking into. Would be a great way to set them up to succeed.
Yeah, that would really be a help because it does provide that self-awareness to the individuals, but also to the person who's coming into it and for them too. So you realize, okay, because with each type of person, as you have to talk to them in a slightly different way, you realize certain
Mm-hmm.
things resonate
Mm-hmm.
with each type of person. And you may find even that with us, in a given corporate culture, you may be hiring people, a lot of people with very similar profiles, say very detail-oriented people sometimes, or very strong communicators sometimes, you would hope, except those are hard to find. And all of this, so it really depends, but it isn't not a bad thing to do. So you've got that overwhelm going on, and you've got that the whole culture going on. And the culture is a problem too, because every corporate culture, every organizational culture instinctively will do what any culture does, which is it will, when it takes you in, it will train you or retrain you
Mm-hmm.
according to its own model. What that really means is, yeah, okay, I'm going into a leadership position in organization X. Automatically, I am going to be slowly indoctrinated with all of their expectations, their way of doing things, their way of thinking. And yeah, that's okay, but it's also a danger because if you're in a leadership position, you're expected to help take the organization from point A to point B, or even better, from point A to point Z. Then it's going to take rocking the boat. And organizational cultures don't like boat rocking, which is part of the problem.
It really is. So speaking about boat rocking, let's talk about resilience. My personal observation is that there's a decrease in resilience in the workplace right now and an increase in sensitivity. Do you feel like it's a leader's responsibility to be developing that resilience within their teams, within their people?
So when you're talking about resilience in this sense, what you're talking about is the personal resilience of everybody on the team, plus the team as a whole,
Yes.
and all of that. And I think it's absolutely true. I think there's a decrease in personal resilience among people. And I think as we hire more and more into younger and younger generations, I think we're going to see that very much. So there is that. There's a lot of life pressure on people, right? There's people just face a lot
Mm-hmm.
of pressures in life. And that is one of the things that organizational cultures have to come to grips with, especially now, is people have their home life, they have their significant other, their family, their whatever. So they have all this going on. And you have to find a way to facilitate their contribution to you. In
Mm-hmm.
order to do that, you have to take as much stress off of them as you possibly can. And which means
I like how
giving
you
them
said that.
time to deal with things, giving them the space to deal with things. And yeah, you'll have to be more and more flexible with that. You'll have to give people more vacation time maybe than you used to. You'll have to, and that's especially the case, I think, in the United States, where if we look at the developed world and the amount of vacation time that people get in the United States, it's astronomically smaller than people in every
Mm,
other developed country, just about.
yeah.
Okay, what do you expect that to do to social stability? Probably not a
Mm-hmm.
good idea. And it's probably not going to help you overall as an organization. So again, it's looking at all of this and thinking, okay, what can I do to facilitate their contribution? Because I need these people's contribution, or else we sink as an
Yeah.
organization. So yeah, I think you're right. We have to look at it from that point of view. There is less and less, I think, personal resilience when it comes to people, but there are also more exogenous factors on organizations now than they're used to dealing with too. If we think about the kind of exogenous factors that organizations have been facing in the last few years,
Yeah.
from the climate point of
Craziness.
view, for instance, it's just worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was at a was a talk given by someone who's a leader in the US in emergency management and business continuity planning. And this person was saying, yeah, I was working with companies on the eastern seaboard of the US, and we would always tell them, make sure you have a backup site where you can continue your work if something goes badly where you are, and always make sure your backup site is about 50 miles away. And then along came Hurricane whichever, I forget
Mhm.
which, and it shut down electricity for 500 miles inland or something
Oh
like
my
that, and
God.
suddenly the 50 miles meant nothing.
Mm.
Yeah, okay, you're going to have to think about this because if you're if your company is in somebody else's supply chain, they're going to want to know that you are able to continue business and deliver. If you're, let's say, you're providing let's say you build landing gear for the next batch of Boeing 787s or something, I'm sorry, they're going to want to be sure that they can get that. And landing gear may not be the sexiest part of the plane, but you can't go anywhere without it.
So, you've spoken about society reaching an impasse with regard to leadership across the board. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Maybe this is my personal observation, but I really do feel that as a society, we in the West are have reached an impasse in a number of areas. And I think of it in some ways, it's really an overall leadership impasse, but it manifests itself in many ways in political life, in economic life. It certainly manifests in those spheres where there are fewer and fewer new ideas. It's more ideas tend to be more and more rehashed and regurgitation of what already either has stopped working or never did work, but
Mhm.
certainly not everything that used to work does work. And so we're faced with new challenges, but we really don't have tools to meet the challenges. It's a bit like Einstein's famous dictum, no problem can be solved using the level of consciousness that created it. And that's where we are. We're trying to use old think to address new and seemingly insurmountable problems. And we still have no idea how to square the need for growth, the growth provided, say, by the capitalist system in general, with the needs of society for stability and sustainability. How do we square that? And we also are facing and are about to face in a big time a real problem we have never in living memory faced and long before living memory, and that's population decline. Population is declining everywhere in the developed world. And what does that mean? One geopolitical analyst, Peter Zion, said, look, we don't have an economic model for that because for 500 years, every assumption we've made has to do with population getting bigger.
It's
You do.
good news. It's good news for the planet, though, I think.
Yeah, could
The
be.
less humans on the planet, the better it's going to be for the sustainability of the actual planet. So there's that. But I so let's talk about. I want to go back to I'm very in the navigating conflict in the workplace,
Yeah.
and how do we, with the newer generations coming in and the shift in leadership and how we need to lead, just speak to that a little bit because I know it's just a very, I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss with the fact that my understanding is that we need, in the current circumstances, decreased resilience, increased sensitivity. We need a much more robust ability to communicate between people, interpersonal communication. And then I was just talking to somebody who was saying, yeah, the kids these days, because they've been on social media, their brains are wired up to not be able to have that communication in the way that other older brains do. And so I'm going to read that book and find out what the hell he's talking about, but because that's terrifying. But
Yeah.
where do we go? What do we do?
I'd love to pretend that I knew the answer to that question. I mean,
maybe
that's
by maybe by the end of this one, a couple of years from here, after interviewing 100 people, I'll come up with something.
part of it's maybe to realize that generational difference is not new. So
Mhm.
when I came into the workforce, I was still dealing with, as senior leadership, I was still dealing with that veteran generation. And their whole idea was very much hierarchical command and control. They had never adjusted to the fact that they were hiring people who were quote unquote smarter than they are. And it's not that we are necessarily smarter, it's just we have particular expertise that they could
Right.
never wrap their heads around that. And so it's not just that, but obviously, as you said, it's right now, younger generations, we have more sensitivity. Many people would say, given the current what's going on in the academic institutions by way of indoctrination into woke ideology and all of this, that we're actually training people
Ideology, I
to
love
be
that.
we're training people to be hypersensitive. We're training people to be easily offended.
Yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
that's not helping them. There's no way they're going to be able to navigate the working world unless they get rid of that mindset. And you can't pander to it because it's not doing them a favor. It's realizing that, yeah, people saying things that you don't agree with isn't automatically a cause for offense. It
right.
really is okay. People don't have to
To
agree on
disagree.
everything. I look back at maybe what I thought 2 years ago. I don't agree with me. Why would I agree with you? People change, and people only speak from their own experience. So it's having different opinions is not automatically a bad thing. But as you say, we have to be able to communicate. And you're talking about that this person mentioned social media and brains being wired differently. I'm not sure, did you mean just maybe short attention span, or is it that the only way to communicate is to send them a text?
I think so. I don't know. I'm going to read the book. But I like you triggered something when you were saying about being offended by this and that. I've experienced the generation that I'm in the middle of the two, is people saying you should be offended by it. I'm not actually offended by it, but there's this expectation like you should be offended by that. But and I'm like, is there something wrong with me? Have I been programmed up? And I think it is. It's a shift of trying to understand that it would be offensive for some people, but then it's also not offensive, and I need to understand why it would be offensive to that person and not be dismissive of why they feel offended by it.
Yeah, and yet again, there's well, the question is what should be offensive and what's not. Then just an alternate opinion should not necessarily be offensive, and that's the thing. So people have to get work around that, because think about it, to be offended so many times a day, think of the
It's
waste of
exhausting.
energy that goes into
Right.
that. Think of how
Yeah.
you're just exhausting yourself, let alone the
Yeah.
people around you have to listen to you being offended. It's really unproductive. So the idea that we will have to walk on eggshells around everybody is ridiculous, because ultimately a democracy can't function that way. It's
Okay. So I've got
impossible.
one last big question for you, and you may or may not have the answer, but you'll have thoughts. So I would love to know your thoughts on how leaders can create the environment for people to feel safe to say those things that offended me, that actually didn't offend me, just to be able to have that the psychological safety. What can leaders do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that they are not creating a walk on eggshells environment?
Yeah, part of it certainly with whoever you're responsible, whoever your team is, right? You at least get to know these people and if you develop a personal relationship with people where they feel safe to talk to you, where they know that even though, okay, you're the boss, but you're approachable as a human being. And part of the way you do that is by making them realize you depend on them. So you're not constantly overriding what they're telling you, but you're actually listening. And again, it goes
Mm-hmm.
back to, as you mentioned, empathy. You have to be able to listen and develop those communication skills, whether it's things as simple as reflective listening. Okay, here's what I hear you saying. Am I right? Did I interpret that right?
Yeah.
So being sure that you're developing real communication with people and not filtering things too much through your own lenses.
Mm-hmm.
But to take the time to communicate with people, this is one of the things that often happens when people get in positions of authority in a team of whatever size, whatever level, is they isolate themselves. They don't bother going to talk to people. They just look at whatever they get sent through email or attachments or whatever. Okay, here's your latest. Just submit your work to me when you're done. That's
Mm-hmm.
the level of communication you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
That's not real communication. It's also realizing that what makes human beings innately feel good. The answer is fairly simple. We are creative beings. We need to feel we are creating. We need to be creative. We need to have that freedom to be creative. And part of being creative is one of the greatest expressions of being creative is problem solving. People love to problem solve because it's a creative process. And if you can provide venues where people can problem solve both on their own, but also as groups, they love that. Heck, that's what you hired them for. That's if it's in their area of expertise, it's what they're good at, it's what they live for. Yeah.
And I think a key piece to what you're saying, and this is what is newer to the workforce, is when you said facilitate, they deliver what you need. And part of that is minimizing the stress on them. So
Yeah.
that's the piece that needs to be taken into account. The conversations about what do you need from me to do what you need to do. And if that is pick
Yeah.
your kid up from school at 3 o'clock every day, I will facilitate that. And I think that that is what's required now by the younger generations. You need to see me as a human being. And it wasn't so much required 20, 30 years ago, where you had a two parents in the family and there was someone at home taking care of everything, and you could get to work at 8 a.m. and stay till 6 p.m. and things were taken care of, and you'd go home to your intact family. And now it's just, there's different. Yeah, it's not that way anymore.
Not at all. And one of the things you said made me think of an incident where I was at a conference, this was about 20 years ago now, where there were a number of people from both public and private sector in a room, and they were talking about, I guess, about hiring. And one of them said, our problem today, this was somebody from the government public sector, saying, our problem today is we're not hiring the best people. And immediately somebody else, again from the public sector, said, I totally disagree. Our problem is not that we're not hiring the best people, we are. Problem is when we hire them, we bring them in and we put them in a little box and we tell them, here's not only what you're going to do, but how you're going to do it. So we provide them absolutely no
creativity,
no creativity, no space for creative thought, no space for innovation, no space for anything. Just do it. It's the equivalent of it's digital bolt tightening or widget tightening.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's that industrial age culture applied to the knowledge worker, and this hasn't totally subsided yet. Yeah, communication, though, huge. And it's an issue, right? Because how well a person communicates is a very individual thing.
And I know this sounds so last century. However, and I don't know if they'll be able to get an AI bot to be able to do it at some point, but that the ability of being a neutral third party in a conversation, just for me, I sit in that role a lot, and it's just so interesting to be able to see how it's breaking down and how, as the tool of that neutral third party, to say, did you hear them say this? No, they didn't. I didn't hear that. I heard this. Oh, and the other person, well, that wasn't what I was trying to say. I was trying to say this. And so to try to get them on the same page there's those ahs that happen. And I feel like it's like there needs to be that I don't know, that human in there saying, no, you've misunderstood. Let me translate for you.
So you've been in this unique situation where you're hearing two people talk totally past each other.
Yes.
It's fascinating to watch.
Yes. And then it's fascinating to actually bring them onto the same page, like to start off and they feel like they're on such different places that they'll never agree on anything. And then as they start to understand each other, it's such a relief.
Do you think that could be applied to the political situation? Just asking, but it's true, right? It's but that is perhaps part of the cultural problem too, right? That we are in a time and place of extreme polarization in society.
Yes.
And so the tendency with polarization is you pick a tribe, your tribe, and you demonize everybody else without actually asking, okay, what are your real concerns? And that's, of course, totally unproductive. It doesn't help in any sort of group environment, whether it's the country as a whole or whether it's just an organization.
Because the chasm between each person or party just gets bigger and bigger, and it's just makes it impossible to come back to the middle. With that, unless you have any last final words of wisdom.
Well, I'm not sure I've had much wisdom, but I don't have any, I can't think of any final words. So
Okay.
it's been a pleasure.
It's been such a pleasure. I really appreciate you speaking with me today, and I look forward to possibly connecting again in the future where we can like update each other on our progress.
I'll send you a link and people can go there and grab for free the digital copy.
And what is the name of the book?
Resilience Culture.
Resilience Culture. There we go. We all need this book. Okay. Thank you so much.